our central bank didn't have to drop the interest rates like a brick, didn't have to increase the interest rate like a balloon. It was a very moderate, very balanced view of things. So our central bank today is in a very good position with a good balance sheet of the central government. Our central government's liabilities are just about 52% of the GDP, and GDP growing nominal at 11-12% is a very good situation to be in. So I think, yes, fiscal consolidation is a very important priority. But what is important is we have to look at growth as the primary driver, moderate inflation as the primary decision point, and combine the fiscal and monetary policy to continue that momentum for next 10 years.
Exciting conversation. If the size of the room is anything to go by, there is already a lot of interest in the India story. It's a packed audience here at the World. Joining us, the IT and Telecom Minister, Mr. Min.Ashwini Vaishnaw. Started, again, for context, what are the big mega trends that global investors and domestic investors are looking at when they look at India? Consumption, it is going to be perhaps the largest market on the strength of the fact that we are today the world's most populous country. It could perhaps also be the workforce of the world because we have a very young population at this point in time, and that's the expectation and the assumption and the estimates that many are making. And of course, the other big trends that India could capitalize on, digitalization. And we've made inroads on that on the back of the India stack. What will that mean, not just for the domestic market, but also in terms of taking this global is going to be the question, and also how digitalization opens up the market in terms of access to credit, access to finance, the spending and borrowing behavior of the Indian consumer. And finally, the big energy transition. India has also put together fairly ambitious goals as far as energy transition is concerned. It has its challenges, but it also throws up opportunities. So those are going to be the areas of conversation that I intend to take forward here with the ministers. Minister Vaishnaw, let me start by talking to you. As I said, there is no consensus on where global growth is headed and where the global economy is headed. Where there is consensus is that globalization as we knew it has changed. There is a reshaping of the world that's taking place, driven largely by geopolitics, which is now dictating how geoeconomics is going to work. So I want to understand from you, how is the Indian government looking at the multipolar world today? India's role in it, and specifically in terms of a roadmap to be able to get to whether it's 5 trillion or 10 trillion, where do you believe we stand on the reform roadmap? How much more work needs to be done?
Thank you, Shireen. India has approached this entire transition which is happening in the world on multiple dimensions. The first dimension is to make sure that India's economy is resilient. There is a good, consistent 6 to 8% growth rate for a complete decade. It's not just 1 year or 2 year kind of thing. The thought process and the policy framework which follows is for a complete decade, 6 to 8% growth with very moderate inflation. The second dimension is when the world is looking for resilient supply chains, and as you said in your opening statement, India has a very young population. So how do we attract large number of supply chain participants to India? How do we make it resilient? How do we use our research and development capabilities? And third part, of course, the energy transition as well as the digital stack. So I'll cover all the 3 points. When the pandemic hit and the whole world was going through a very big crisis, which was humanitarian crisis as well as an economic crisis, there were 2 approaches followed by various governments. The first approach was followed by so many countries was send out checks, make sure people get money in their hands. They consume, and that consumption will lift the market. There was a whole lot of liquidity pumped in. The combined balance sheets of US Fed, European Bank and Japanese Central Bank, the combined increase in balance sheet was about $9 trillion US. That created a very quick sugar rush kind of growth, but it also brought with it unprecedented inflation. And that inflation is not going to go away so easily. It takes a time because pushing liquidity is easy, taking it out is very difficult, and it's always very painful. On the contrary, India adopted a very pragmatic approach. Fiscal space that any country would have is always limited. It's always constrained. There is no unlimited capital in the world. Anybody can give those MMT theories, but that's bunkum. Don't believe that. Capital is always scarce. Capital is always limited. How do you use the capital that you have? That's the choice that Prime Minister Modi ji made. He made a choice that very focused consumption and support to the most vulnerable groups, vulnerable sections of the population. So about 800 million people got limited financial aid, plus free food for almost third year now. So that was one very important part. Vaccination, free vaccination program. Again, 1.3 billion doses in the first 14 months. By now we have crossed 2.1 billion doses and completely done on a digital platform. The most important piece of this decision making that Prime Minister Modi ji made was, with limited and focused consumption, focused on the vulnerable sections, he put entire capital of the country into investment in infrastructure. Now, investment in railways, last year the capex was 23 billion US. This year the capex is, this fiscal which ends on 31st March, the capex is going to be of the order of 26 billion US. Same is the story in railway, in highway, in power transmission. That increases the productivity of the country and gives us the long-term growth potential of the country improves. It's resulting into huge employment generation. Today the country is adding on an average 1.5 million people into formal jobs every month. So that kind of those decisions have shaped the country's destiny over the last few years, and that has put us on a very consistent growth path of 6 to 8%. India is used to an inflation rate of 5 to 7% because large part of energy is imported. So having inflation today at 5.8, 5.9%, that's the latest print. That's very moderate. So high growth, moderate inflation. This we were able to achieve because Prime Minister took very pragmatic and a very focused approach.
So I just want to come in on the point that you made as far as the divergence, as far as the fiscal approach was concerned. While we did see the world move towards great degree of stimulus, and that has led to, as you now point out, a high inflation, inflation at multi-decadal highs, and now a new era of high interest rates as well, posing a big challenge for central bankers across the world. We've, of course, seen in India interest rates move up as well. So fiscal consolidation is going to continue to be a key priority for the Indian government going forward?
One very important part of this entire decision making was Prime Minister ensured that the fiscal policy and monetary policy, they work in tandem. There are so many examples in the world, I wouldn't take any names, where the fiscal policy was going in one direction and the monetary policy was going in another. Our central bank didn't have to drop the interest rates like a brick, didn't have to increase the interest rate like a balloon. It was a very moderate, very balanced view of things. So our central bank today is in a very good position with a good balance sheet of the central government. Our central government's liabilities are just about 52% of the GDP, and GDP growing nominal at 11-12% is a very good situation to be in. So I think, yes, fiscal consolidation is a very important priority. But what is important is we have to look at growth as the primary driver, moderate inflation as the primary decision point, and combine the fiscal and monetary policy to continue that momentum for next 10 years.
Well, the audacity of administration and, of course, the convergence with technology. But, Mr. Vaishnaw, let me address the issue of opportunity and the roadmap ahead. One of the big things that everyone here is talking about is the PLI schemes. The government has announced and rolled out PLI schemes across 13 different sectors. There are different stages of evolution at this point in time because the dates of rollout were different. The question now is, in light of the success of the schemes that have already been rolled out, does the government feel more emboldened and confident to do more, to include more sectors under the PLI schemes? And for existing schemes, for instance, like the FAME scheme, for the benefit of our viewers who don't know, the scheme that was brought in to try and accelerate the growth of electric mobility, the sun sets on many of those schemes in the next year or so. Will the government like to continue? Because investors investing will also want predictability and a roadmap of what incentives will look like. Are we likely to see an extension of the existing subsidies? And are we also likely to see new PLI schemes and new incentives being brought in?
So PLI scheme has proved out to be very successful, both for the government as well as for the industry. In terms of government, to what Mr. Chandra said, we don't put money just like that. We do have our calculations. We do economic IRR, you do financial IRR. So it's...
No, I was not saying that. I was saying you can take the decision upfront.
Of course, so I mean, just take PLI as an example. The outlay for PLI was about 24 billion US. The additional taxes that we are going to get just from the mobile PLI is going to be of that order. So just one mobile PLI pays for the entire PLI that we have for all the sectors. Combined together, the actual tax contribution, additional incremental GST and incremental income tax is going to be significantly more than the outlay that we put for it. What has happened is PLI first brought the assembly to country, right? Over a period of time, over a period of last 1.5 years, the assembly is now going deeper and wider. Component supply chain is shifting to India. Indian homegrown companies are coming up with components as well as many critical parts of the supply chain. And that is what is very, very encouraging. That is what is really good. We believe that, for example, this iPhone 14 is made in India, right? And now quite a few parts of it, quite a few components of it are now getting made in India. So that makes a huge difference. It is adding jobs. It is creating new economic opportunities. Are we likely to do more PLIs? Yes, there are many more PLI items in the work. For example, hardware IT, for servers, for laptops, for PCs. That is another piece to be still in works. There would be, this approach has worked well, so there would be more sectors that we consider.
There will be more sectors. And you brought up that iPhone, and yes, we have seen Apple, through its partner Foxconn, shift a large part of its manufacturing now to India, including assembling the iPad, which is now likely to take place in India as well. Is there also a recalibration in position and strategy in the context of what we heard from Chandra? And I know that just today, apparently, the government has cleared investments from 13 companies that are linked to the Apple ecosystem so that they can assemble the iPad in India. Is there also a recalibration of strategy to say it doesn't matter if the money comes in from China or anywhere else as long as it is creating jobs in India?
Of course, we do follow the trusted supply chain concept in multiple sectors, including electronics and telecom. But what I would like to say is that people today, as Mr. Chandra said, people want effective and resilient supply chains. The cost efficiency, which was driving the entire globalization, that is no longer the sole factor. Today, supply chains have to be anti-fragile. Supply chains have to work, whatever be the magnitude of global disruption. So combine all those factors and the experience that we have had in the last few years, there would be many more supply chain partners who are looking at alternate geographies, alternate places. And India is, of course, a very important destination. There is a stability of laws. Prime Minister Modi has shifted, has deleted about 1,500 archaic laws from the statute book. About 20,000 compliances have been removed from the compliance framework that we have. And a lot more simplification is happening. The reforms that Prime Minister did in the telecom sector, today a telecom tower, which used to take 7-8 months for a permission, 70-80% of the cases it happens instantaneously. As in zero time. So it's like you press your enter button, make the payment, and you get your permission. It's as simple as that. So things are improving on sector after sector. There is simplification. Space has been open to private investment. There are young startups who are now launching satellites. It's a totally new story in the country. Green hydrogen hub, the hydrogen mission, which has been approved a couple of weeks back. Already we have 174 gigawatt capacity from non-fossil fuels, which is 42% of India's total energy. So it's a very consistent, multi-dimensional, very resilient, very well thought through approach towards economy.
Chandra, if I can see here, I'm sure many have questions. Yes, sir, go ahead. There's a microphone coming to you.
Hi, I'm Ian Lindsay, an advisor to the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bahrain. I actually led an investment mission into India in June of this year, visiting Delhi, Mumbai and Hyderabad, and the splendidly named Cyberabad in Hyderabad. Ministers, you've talked earlier about potential, huge potential, but also India is already there. You're now the 5th largest economy in the world. You're the largest democracy in the world, and of course you're chairing the G20 this year. And we heard earlier from Chandra at the CII Deloitte's breakfast that you've got your B20. What I think would be quite good to hear is, you've talked about exports, but what does India bring to the table? To quote you, Your Excellency Minister, earlier, what does India bring to the table on international business now that you are up there as having achieved economic strength? That's, I think, what I'd like very much to hear from the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you want to take both of you? Why don't you start?
So, one thing that we would definitely like to offer to the world is the India Stack. Now, India Stack, if we understand it, there was one approach where government was doing everything. I won't take any names. Government would like to control everything. Government would like to do everything in that particular geography. There is another approach where a few big tech, they monopolized everything. We in India in 2016 launched a totally new concept, which is public digital platforms, where the government invested in creating the platform and then anybody can join it. For example, the payment platform. More than 300 banks have joined it. More than 1.2 billion people are using it. Hundreds and hundreds of startups are using it. So that kind of concept, and it's all open source, to the point, what can India offer to the international business? This is an open source, available to everybody. Already 13 countries have signed MOUs with us, and we'd be very happy to offer it to the world. And again, as Minister Irani said, this is not for profit. This is purely our soft contribution to the world.
And that is clearly one of the very important revolutions that we must ensure is unleashed, because to truly unlock the power of the economy, we need to unlock the power of India's women as well. Minister Vaishnaw, Minister Irani, and Chandrasekharan, many, many thanks for joining us here to give us your insights on what the India story looks like, and more importantly, where the India story is headed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon.